use those, recording in progress, to use those Zoom reactions. Don Rothman is led the planning of this event with the support of our writing program staff, Fiona Wygant and Margaret Tam. Thanks to all of you. And I'm also grateful to the many lecturers who served on the Rothman committee this year. I'll now hand it over to Madeline to frame out today's events.
Thanks, Amy. And welcome to everyone. My name is Madeline Lane McKinley, and I'm a faculty member of the writing program. It's been my honor this year to serve as the chair of the Don Rothman Award Committee. For the last academic year, we received 54 excellent submissions from first-year students at UCSC. And our committee faced the difficult task of selecting 4 awardees while we were blown away by the talent of so many students. The depth and variety of creative and critical rigor of the student work we carefully read and discussed also reflected so much of the amazing teaching of our colleagues in the writing program. As I met with today's awardees in preparation for this event, I was reminded of my own experiences as an undergraduate and the transformative impact several teachers had on my life as a writer. Each of the student projects we'll be honoring today is a testament to why we teach writing. Okay, so as we come together today to celebrate student writing, writing pedagogy, and the achievements of our 4 awardees, I want to add to some of Amy's reflections on the late Don Rothman and his legacy at UCSC. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet Don, but in my time as a writing program faculty member, I've learned so much from colleagues who knew him well and who have extended some of his core values and pedagogical commitments to the future. He will be known well beyond his years for a belief that guided his teaching, that we, quote, write to avoid the humiliation of silence in the face of injustice. One of the key insights I've gained from working with those Don mentored is that the writing classroom can be a transformative site for social justice and critical inquiry. And I believe in each of the student projects featured in today's ceremony, there are glimmers of this utopian possibility of writing as a way to forge difficult dialogues, confront urgent questions, and create community. So today we'll be listening to excerpts presented by 3 of our 4 awardees. But before that, I'd like to introduce the Dean of Humanities, Jasmine Alinder, who we're honored can join us today for this celebration and has some opening remarks for us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm honored to welcome you all to this virtual ceremony live. So exciting for the annual Don Rothman Endowed Award in First Year Writing. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much to the members of the Rothman Committee, including Madeline Lane McKinley. Thank you also, Amy Vidali, for your leadership of the writing program. And thanks to all of you, all the faculty and staff of the writing program. For those of you who are not part of that faculty and staff, you should know that we have a very incredible faculty here, and that their caliber is something that's incredibly special and something that I do not certainly take for granted. This event often brings together a vibrant community, including the current Rothman Award recipients and their instructors. Maybe we have some friends and family and Rothman Endowment donors. And so on behalf of the Humanities Division, I want to thank all of you for what you've done to make this event possible. And a special congratulations to all the writers that we are celebrating here today, and to the award winner, selected, as Madeline said, from 54 submissions after careful review from the Don Rothman Awards Committee. I am by training a historian of photography, and it's meaningful to me that the great teacher of writing, after whom this award is named, Don Rothman, also wrote about photography, including ways of seeing, photographs and essays during a time of reflection, and other works that explore the intersection of writing and photographic representation, including Looking for Bethlehem, about a steel mill in Pennsylvania. So it's an honor for me to take a few minutes to talk with you about writing. And I think it's a very interesting moment to think about what it means to be a writer. And as I mentioned in these remarks last year, and I'll do again this year, I've never really thought of myself or described myself as a writer or a teacher of writing, which perhaps is confusing because most of my, not all, but most of my scholarly activity, in fact, involves writing and writing in pretty formal venues, including books and articles and other kinds of forms of writing that scholars, historians tend to produce. I'm also a public historian, and so I work on projects that are not just public facing, but really try to leverage what's usually referred to as shared authority, or the idea that public history is created at an intersection. It's a kind of co-creation of knowledge project and created the intersection between public and academic expertise. Writing is central to all of that scholarly activity, all of my professional activity. So there is a kind of strange disconnect, I feel sometimes, between my self-perception and my actual professional life. And that disconnect reminds me of a question that I usually ask my students when I was able to teach classes. My students in history of photography classes, I would ask them at the beginning of class, how many of you are photographers? And almost no one would ever raise their hand. But if I reframed the question and I asked them, how many of you take pictures, with a camera? Of course, everyone raises their hand. Everyone's hand goes up. So even in that context, students were making a distinction between everyday amateur, maybe vernacular practice, and maybe what they saw as professional practice. So we all take pictures, but we don't all consider ourselves to be photographers. And in a similar way, I author books and articles, but I actually don't think of myself as a writer. It's a kind of title that I reserve for novelists and poets, people who have been trained in the art and craft of writing. But I'm not so sure that should be the case. And when I look back on my scholarly training, I unfortunately did not have the opportunity that our students here have. I don't think I was really ever explicitly taught to write. And I certainly didn't have the kind of ALC curriculum, that's redundant, ALC program that you've created here, and that works so beautifully to help train students in the art and craft of writing, and so much more. So just because I wasn't necessarily trained to be a writer in those undergraduate years, it didn't mean that good writing wasn't expected from me. It absolutely was. But it also wasn't made clear to me how I would ever get from brainstorming, free writing, to any kind of polished final draft. I don't think anyone really admitted how hard writing is and how much time and mental energy it takes. So I have to write my job every day, and it's absolutely the hardest thing I do because it's difficult to do well. And I'm wondering if that is why the idea of artificial intelligence, that AI could take over this hard work, why it might be so appealing to some. But I want to ask you, what would it mean if we stopped writing? What if we outsourced it entirely? We've already seen pretty recently how that can go terribly wrong. There's a recent controversy in a university setting when humans outsourced writing to ChatGPT. If you saw the news about Vanderbilt University being called out for using ChatGPT to construct an email to campus constituents expressing condolences after the tragic shooting at Michigan State. And in that case, it seemed particularly important that the expression of condolences and the desire to, quote, come together as a community that the email opined, that it needs to be said by humans to humans. To outsource that form of writing is akin to outsourcing emotion and concern and the kind of empathy that such emails are meant to foster. But what about student writing? What about writing that demonstrates learning? The science fiction writer Ted Chiang just wrote about ChatGPT in a New Yorker article from last month. The article was titled, ChatGPT is a blurry JPEG of the web. I just want to quote a little bit from his piece. He writes, obviously no one can speak for all writers, but let me make the argument that starting with a blurry copy of unoriginal work, which he's saying is what essentially ChatGPT generates, isn't a good way to create original work. If you're a writer, you will write a lot of unoriginal work before you write something original. And the time and effort expended on that unoriginal work isn't wasted. On the contrary, I would suggest that it is precisely what enables you to eventually create something original. The hours spent choosing the right word and rearranging sentences to better follow one another are what teach you how meaning is conveyed by prose. Having students write essays isn't merely a way to test their grasp of the material. It gives them experience in articulating their thoughts. If students never have to write essays that we have all read before, they will never gain the skills needed to write something that we have never read, end quote. Does it feel like we have everything already written that we will ever need? I don't think so. But even if or when we get to a point when AI is really capable of writing something new, will we humans still find meaning in the intellectual activity of writing? I think we will, no matter how hard it is. Don Rothman cared about writing because he cared about democracy and vice versa. He passed away over a decade ago, but every day I and others on this campus, including all of you gathered here today, benefit from the work that Professor Rothman and others in the writing program have done and continue to do. Writing is the way that I communicate who I am as a scholar, as a parent, as an advocate, as an educator. I might not be ready to call myself a writer, but I will take inspiration from all of you award-winning writers today. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's now my pleasure to introduce Bridge Lenine, who's the instructor of two of our awardees today. And he will be introducing the first of those, Julia Spillman, who received our honorable mention.
Thank you so much. I had the pleasure of working with Julia in the honors section of Writing 2 Winter last year, 2022. Julia's first paper in the class was a personal essay about fishing with her dad when she was 11, catching a 10-pound carp that broke her rod and how her parents let her struggle to reel it in all by herself. Titled Carp a Diem, struggle ended up being the theme of her story. Julia talked about how it was important that she struggled by herself to overcome that challenge on her own. Throughout the quarter, Julia produced consistently excellent work. Little did I know that she struggled with a disability that sounded straight out of an Oliver Sacks article. In writing about her disability, Julia taught the class and created an atmosphere of trust through vulnerability. Aphantasia, which I had never heard of before, is such a hidden condition. Julia's paper does a great job of showing the reader what it's like and teaching us about the condition. I'll let her explain further, but I'm very pleased to introduce Julia Spillman, who will read an excerpt from her paper, Aphantasia, an Unusual Blindness. Congratulations, Julia.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. And I also want to thank you for not only showing interest in my writing and encouraging me to pursue this activity, but for your passion in the classroom that inspired me to experiment with my pieces. In my research essay, Aphantasia, an Unusual Blindness, I was encouraged to deviate from the standard research format and incorporate my personal experiences, resulting in this piece acting both informatively and as a call to action. If you're having trouble sleeping, try counting sheep. It's likely that we've all heard this phrase at some point in our childhood. Naturally, when you're told to count sheep, you're not counting literal sheep, you're counting imaginary ones. This method seems quite easy and accessible if you assume that everyone is capable of conjuring an image of sheep in their minds. But have you ever considered the possibility that there are those who are unable to actually see the sheep? The phrase counting sheep always confused me as a child because I have never been able to visualize the sheep at all. It wasn't until recently that I discovered that many people could actually see the sheep and quite literally counted them. The inability to imagine is called aphantasia, a term coined in 2015 by Professor Adam Zeman of the University of Oxford, and it's widely considered a neuropsychological disorder. Currently, there is no known remedy for aphantasia, and with it affecting a fraction of the population, it remains relatively unknown in the science world. As a result, aphantasia is usually self-diagnosed and discovered later on in life due to the lack of information about it. It's difficult for those without aphantasia to understand what it means to be unable to imagine, so I implore you to close your eyes and imagine an apple. It's likely that you see some rendition of an apple, be it hyper-realistic or cartoon, the image is there. Aphantasics see complete darkness, no apple, no image. The official definition of aphantasia is the complete inability to voluntarily create and see mental images. Aphantasic Benny Kapler, in his 2021 article, Aphantasia, Out of Sight, Out of Mind, digs into the personal effects of aphantasia by explaining that there is zero visual recall for anything, be it a person's face, what a word looks like, where I left my keys, a beautiful moment, childhood. As an aphantasic, I've noticed that my ability to recall directions and memories from a mere few years ago is far below average. Others are able to remember experiences that I have no recollection of, despite having been there. Core memories of my own, like high school graduation or my first day of school, are lost in the murky depths of my mind. In Nicholas Watkins' 2018 article, Aphantasia and Severely Deficient Autobiographical Memory, Scientific and Personal Perspectives, he notes that he has had more trouble recollecting information than those who can imagine. While this poses a fascinating point of research in the scientific community, this can prove to be difficult and create many challenges in everyday life. With aphantasia affecting many aspects of an individual's life, it's extremely important that more research is done on aphantasia and that there is more awareness of the condition. Current studies have outlined and affirmed what we do know about the condition. However, more work needs to be done in order to understand the neurology of being unable to imagine. Furthermore, the present understanding of aphantasia needs to be publicized better through forms of activism utilizing the plethora of social media platforms available. With such a small percentage of the population experiencing aphantasia, it has become all the more important to raise awareness in order to accommodate aphantasics and provide a spot for those who don't follow the traditional path. With the human brain constantly changing and evolving, it's important that society continues to morph and change alongside it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing that, and congratulations again. It was such a pleasure to read your essay. I'm going to reintroduce Bridge, but Bridge is going to be speaking of a student who unfortunately can't make it today, and we really appreciate that Amy Vidali will be reading on her behalf.
Thanks, Madeline, and thanks in advance, Amy. Camilo Lagunera Ravanera wrote the essay From Splendor in the Grass to Sexploitation, the Sex Revolution of the 1960s in American Cinema. Spring 2022, I had the pleasure to work with Camille, who was also in the honors section of Writing 2. And she was able, like Julia, to combine the personal with the analytical quite successfully in several papers. I was pretty blown away by her first paper, which was a personal essay titled Graduation Day and the Horrors of Woodside. She wrote in a wonderfully descriptive and evocative way about the sexism, class inequality, and racism in one of the Bay Area's most exclusive communities. I'm just going to read you the opening because I found it so good. It was a time when the fire of my high school experience was burning into embers, and I realized that the best, brightest flames were just as good as coal. Suddenly, I had been rushed into the excitement of all that high school had to offer, but could not give me for the remaining last year. A non-prom dance was simply the reminder of an empty promise from the year before, a senior sunrise planned for the end of the year, and suddenly graduation. Graduation! All of these events fit into the span of a couple weeks, sped up my senior year, and made it feel like senior year express. Before I knew it, I was lost in a sea of orange, my school color. 500 traffic cones lined up to receive their diplomas and applause. The summation of the last 4 years spent under the strangest of conditions. The essay for which she is being honored showcases her ability to combine personal writing, in this instance, with strong scholarship. Camille is interested in film production and in film studies. In her essay, From Splendor in the Grass to Sexploitation, the Sex Revolution of the 60s in American Cinema, Camille is able to look at film production in a historical context, not only through the lens of genre, but through both history and the analysis of sexuality, to show how film both reflects social change, but can be reactionary too. Amy will read an excerpt of her award-winning essay, and congratulations in absentia to Camille. And thanks again, Amy.
Okay, I'm going to try and do this justice. I haven't read it before. Glazed my eyes over it. It starts with a quote. I don't need a man to make it happen. I get off being free. I don't need a man to make me feel good. I get off doing my thing. I don't need a ring around my finger to make me feel complete. So let me break it down. I can get off when you ain't around. Oh, that's Nicole Scherzinger, the song I Don't Need a Man. I bump to the thump of the beat and Nicole Scherzinger's voice as I watch my older cousins get ready in the mirror, unaware of the crude yet empowering lyrics I sing along to as I stare at their manicured reflections, brushing on MAC powders and adjusting their Playboy necklaces. It is 2008. The ideologies of the sexual revolution of the 1960s have manifested into the lyrics of the Pussycat Dolls. I am 6 years old. Whether or not I knew it then, I was being indoctrinated with the ideologies of second wave feminism popularized in the 1960s and 70s, in which women's orgasms were politicized and women were encouraged to get off being free. The Pussycat Dolls would not exist without the idea of equating female empowerment with sexual liberation. Through the years, learning about sexual and gender politics would be a subject of empowerment in the attempt to make sense of not only the cultural landscape that I was born into, but also an act of reclaiming and knowing the effects of sexual trauma and violence against women. Additionally, the recent link of the possible decision to overturn Roe v. Wade in 2022 makes second wave feminism, whose efforts focused much on the reproductive rights of women and contributed to the ruling in favor of Roe in Roe v. Wade in 1973, and the discussion surrounding women's bodies all the more relevant. Growing up in the age of the internet has also made me aware of the constant production of gendered images and depictions of gender and sexuality, as well as my consumption of the ideas promoted within them. In studying depictions of women's sexual liberation or lack thereof in film through the 1960s, and focusing particularly on the long 1968, extending between 1965 and 1972, I hope to elucidate how these representations reflect the changing attitudes towards sex at the time, as well as their impact on today's depictions of women's sexuality in cinema. Jane Fonda's work in Barbarella, produced post-production code, politicizes the female orgasm. In Barbarella, the first film to show a woman coming to climax without it being induced by a man, Fonda plays a heroine in outer space and is characterized by Young as the liberal sexual subject. Young claims that the liberal sexual subject is, quote, a subject for whom sexual pleasure has been expressive of the liberal and Republican principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In the movie, Barbarella enters the excessive machine and orgasms multiple times. Her autonomous pleasure is sustainable and self-sufficient. This scene, read in the context of second wave feminism, is representative of female independence beyond the sexual as a result of Barbarella's clitoral orgasm, and thus an explicit depiction of a movement far bigger than Barbarella's enjoyment of her sexuality. Focus on women's sexual emancipation included the reclamation of the clitoris. Young describes the clitoral orgasm as, quote, freed from intercourse, from any necessary role in reproduction, and even more radically, from heterorelationality in general, end quote. The feminist response and praise of the clitoral orgasm may be in response to Freud's belief in clitoral orgasms as a regressive pleasure, and the only valid orgasms for adult women to have must be through penetration. Barbarella, boldly second wave feminist, is undeniably a part of the exploitation.
Good. Go ahead and open up each other's papers and then right up at the top of yours. Something that you were struggling with that we can help you
Barbarella, boldly second-wave feminist, is undeniably a part of the exploitation film cycle, sexploitation, blaxploitation, etc., though also being termed a women's picture by critics, further associating it with the feminist agenda. Nonetheless, exploitation, art, film, and horror have used sex as a means to discuss other topics concerning racial identity, gender identity, class, and sexual orientation. The rise of these films, many a part of the underground in the 1960s, in which artists such as Andy Warhol produced their work, gave way to more transgressive, controversial, and explicit depictions of sex.
Thank you for reading that, Amy. And I am excited to now hand over the mic to Lindsay Nisley, who is the instructor for our next student awardee, Loki Malik, who won the second place for the Rothman Awards. To you, Lindsay.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Hopefully this will Wi-Fi in the car situation will work. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to the committee. Special thanks, as always, to my friend Don Rothman, who I think would have loved the kind of, I think, groundbreaking thinking exhibited in these student essays. So great to be able to honor him as well. But I wanted to introduce Loki Malik, who I'm really proud to be here celebrating. I've really thought about it long and hard and felt like I have never encountered a college student who thinks as brilliantly as Loki. I've loved Loki's award-winning essay, Lesbian Community, Confusion or Connection, since I first read it last May. Expertly written, engaging the reader from the start with its deft application of critical theory. The second page of the paper explains post-structuralism more clearly than most texts I have read on it. The title of our Writing 2 class, which was named by a student in 2009, is Youth Identity in a Network Culture. And Loki's research essay was an inquiry that explored that topic far more deeply than the others I have read in over 15 years of teaching this Writing 2 class. Just listen here to what Loki theorized in this essay. He writes, the presence of social media and youth identity formation has destabilized the socio-political ability of queer people to fight for their rights. The support queer kids find online pales in comparison to the community older lesbians had grown up in. The combined lack of community support and guidance means queer kids today are less flexible with identities that don't fit their chronically online understanding of gender and sexuality. Digital media is an easy substitute for community when one is not present, but it comes at the expense of true connection. Loki's going to read some of that part to you again in a moment, but you needed to hear it twice. It's that good. The essay is fueled by a powerful passion that builds throughout the paper, which is a testament not only to Loki's intellectual curiosity, but to his capacity to honor his own self-discovery process, which is a challenging thing to do. But Loki's not afraid of a challenge. He is a true scholar. I think this paper is going to turn into Loki's graduate thesis or his first of many books. I predict great things from Loki, and his mind is already changing the world. As a first-year student, he was clearly already an excellent student of critical theory and applied his remarkable theoretical abilities in our classroom discussions and in his written work. It's been wonderful to witness Loki's elegant structures of thought in his writing since he's in his second official class with me right now. We were lucky to have Loki as a special visitor in our core class in fall 2021, and then he was in my Writing 2 class last spring, and he's currently in my Oaks poetry class this quarter. I wanted to mention that all of Loki's work is exemplary. He displays an outstanding ability to discern and describe complex layers of meaning in the material we have studied, in his analytical essays, in his incisive feedback on his peers' work, and in his incredible poetry. Loki is, as always, unafraid of expressing powerful transformative emotion through lyrical imagery in his work, and I encourage him to continue developing his considerable talent for poetry. Thank you, Loki, and congratulations on this well-deserved award. Genius such as yours does not come along very often, and it's an honor to know you.
That's so sweet. Thank you, Nisley. I cannot get enough of Nisley's work. That's why I keep going to classes with her. I also want to note that this piece that I wrote about lesbian community, in fact, informed a lot of the activist work that I'm doing on campus right now to build a lesbian community in lieu of the connections that we had as a community in the past. And with that, I really hope that we can all keep in mind that work like this can be transformative on a community level, and that students like me, queer students across the board, often take the things that they write about and try their best to make them into a reality. That being said, this section is titled Young Lesbians Then and Now, comparing lesbians pre and during social networking sites. The lack of true community is the first thing robbed from lesbians coming into their identity in the modern day. The fact that there is no concrete community means that there is no tribunal of elders from which to learn how to navigate the world. There is no guiding hand that teaches a young lesbian right from wrong. In the lesbian community, the elders served as parental figures, teaching the youth everything from how to flirt to how to change a tire. Removing this found family and generational variation makes it more difficult to organize as a community. The change that queer people were able to invoke during Stonewall relies on the community they had. The largest implication of younger generations' loss of a queer community is that queer people cannot organize to promote change. Consider the anti-LGBTQ+ bills being considered and passed in states like Texas, Oklahoma, and many other states with conservative majorities. Change is difficult to extract on a large scale without a solid community base to support it. The presence of social media and youth identity formation has destabilized the socio-political ability of queer people to fight for their rights. It can feel hopeless for a young queer person to search for change when they cannot even conceptualize themselves as an adult with a fulfilling life. When lesbians of generations past lost family, friends, and jobs due to their sexualities, they had a community to fall back on who would support them. Lesbians today may have a community, but it's not necessarily one who will rally to support them. There is a marked difference between having a friend who will let you sleep on their couch for multiple months because you lost your job, and having friends on social media who will repost your GoFundMe link. So the support queer kids find online pales in comparison to the community older lesbians had grown up in. What now? I am a proponent of the reestablishment of physical queer spaces, especially ones that are easily accessible to anyone of any age. Bars are difficult to go to for a young queer kid, but things like cafes and bookstores can be readily queer. In Santa Cruz, some resources exist for queer kids, which seem to be doing the work of generations past. Other areas are not so fortunate. Digital media is an easy substitute for community when one is not present, but it comes at the expense of true connection. What is touted as a community is just a network of experience. I encourage any questioning lesbians to do the work of finding texts written by lesbians past to gain a greater understanding of themselves in lieu of community. I know that as I continue my identity journey, I will be seeking out more lesbian intergenerational support. The few queer elders I know are so valuable to my understanding of the world, and I sincerely hope that there will be more focus on community and the stories of older lesbians as we begin to bring back queer spaces and all the benefits that come with having a large group of people who understand the struggles and joys of being a lesbian. Thank you.
Yay, thank you so much, Loki, and congratulations again. It's so nice to hear about your connection with Lindsay. I'm going to now introduce us to Dina Eldesoki, who is the instructor of our final student awardee, our first place winner, Camille Vergely. We're running ahead of schedule, which is great because that means I didn't screw anything up as our host. So take your time, Dina, as you introduce your student. I know that you had some things to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here. So I'm going to read what I wrote here. I'm here today with the distinct pleasure of introducing Camille Vergely's first place winning paper, Growing Up on a Dying Planet. But first, I'd like to take us back for a moment to 1970 and to an open letter that James Baldwin wrote to Angela Davis while she was in prison. In his letter, Baldwin writes, "Well, since we live in an age in which silence is not only criminal, but suicidal, I have been making as much noise as I can. Baldwin was referring in part to his appearance on various radio and TV outlets to share his concerns regarding Davis's imprisonment and to share related concerns about the US's treatment of Black people. While the letter comes from a very different time and context and raises different concerns, Camille's paper on climate change reflects Baldwin's imperative for communities of conscience to resist the urge to hold their tongues in the face of harm, and to also hold ourselves accountable to those most vulnerable to that harm. Camille's paper examines climate change through a close encounter with an unusually intense forest fire, one that threatens dual homes for her, both the house she lived in at that time and a forest that she grew incredibly close with. She describes in palpable detail the panic that sweeps over her household when she realizes that her family's home could burn down. To capture the intimacy of Camille's prose as she describes how the forest also became home to her, I must share an excerpt. She writes, "While I contemplated my possessions, I was flooded with memories from my childhood and teen years, and mentally retraced the hike I had taken countless times. To reach the cool, shady core of the forest, I'd cross a few dead fields, walk through a dusty horse stable, usually empty save for one light brown mare, and follow a narrow trail for an hour. It went up little hills, through shallow pools of murky water, and between old ferns as it branched into invisible coyote paths. Little birds would be nesting, foraging, and chasing prey in the grasses and brush, bustling full of life below me. Above my head, the trees seemed to bend, curious to spot a visitor. They would extend their long branches across the path, snagging my hair and pulling on my clothes, sometimes scratching off a little skin by accident." Through these words, Camille's paper also reminds us how important it is for each of us to listen deeply, to place. The imagery-rich portions of Camille's paper that detail her relationship with the forest could only have been written by someone who sat long enough and with enough intentional presence to get to know the place intimately and hear the place directly share its own story. So often we fear that when we speak up and use our voices, that those with more power and influence will willfully ignore, dismiss, or stifle what we have to say. We fear that we speak up in vain. The overwhelming nature of climate change and the systems and institutional power implicated within it can make speaking up about it feel futile. This brings me back to Baldwin, who in his own 1970 letter to Davis expressed doubts as to the effectiveness of his voice. He called his speaking up, quote, very probably an exercise in futility, end quote, but nonetheless asserted, quote, but one must let no opportunity slide, end quote. Camille's winning essay seizes the opportunity to turn a college writing assignment into critical testimony. And in doing so, the writing shakes us with the power of its truth. It is an act of witness now on the books in a time of criminal denial, and the value of witness in these times must not be underestimated. So with that, I introduce to you the amazing writer, Camille Vergely.
Thank you so much, Dr. D. And before I read, I just wanted to really thank Dr. D for encouraging me to submit, because as undergrad students, especially since we spend our years writing essays, and it can be so hard to like see the quality or see your potential, and it's hard to differentiate your writing from like your personal creation or an assignment in class. And so it really meant so much when she recommended that I submit, because it had never crossed my mind. And I knew the essay was good, but I never considered submitting it to an award. And I'm really grateful that Dr. D encouraged me. So thank you so much. And with that,
Here's an excerpt from my writing. Today, politicians advertise themselves as ecological saints, only to turn around and pierce the earth with fracking drills. They pose as they dig little holes to plant perfectly pruned trees during ceremonies, and then turn a blind eye to corporations bulldozing the Amazon in the name of profit. They promise change and then compromise in the name of industry. Sometimes they don't even try to hide their disregard for the environment. President Donald Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement in 2020 clearly exemplifies this. According to a press statement by Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, President Trump's withdrawal was a response to, quote, the unfair economic burden imposed on American workers, businesses, and taxpayers by U.S. pledges made under the agreement. In addition to being misleading, this decision simply reveals the president's clear prioritization of clearing the path to profit over bringing all nations into a common cause to combat climate change. Furthermore, it introduces a trend and an acceptance of climate denialism within American politics that is becoming an essential part of the right wing's identity. In light of the recent California wildfires, New York Times reporters Michael M. Grimbaum and Tiffany Sue examined this political trend by collecting quotes from right-wing leaders who express, quote, skepticism that climate change is a factor in the fires devastating the West Coast. A common argument they encountered was that the 9,900 forest fires that happened in California in 2020 were all a simple matter of forest management. As put by Republican radio host Mark Levin, it sure as hell would help if these forests in these timber areas were free to be properly managed, but they're not. This sentiment was echoed by President Donald Trump, who confidently asserted, it'll start getting cooler, you just watch, during a meeting with California officials. When he was met with opposition from scientists, the president simply responded, well, I don't think science knows, actually. While some politicians remain on this level of absurdity, others turn to conspiracy and link climate disasters to other issues. On live national TV, Fox News host Tucker Carlson sarcastically mocked environmental initiatives, saying that in the hands of the Democratic Party, climate change is like systemic racism in the sky. You can't see it, but rest assured, it's everywhere and it's deadly. And like systemic racism, it's your fault. Yes, the technique of distracting your audience by linking two controversial issues and fueling hatred. Through the multiple layers of ignorance within this opinion, not only does Mr. Carlson deny a global emergency, but he mudslings other serious societal problems and creates a conspiracy, encouraging his viewers to be guided by their emotions rather than their common sense. Turning away from scientific facts, especially on environmental disasters, is a dangerous road to go down, as it divides people, releases denialists from their responsibility, and allows for the continuation of our planet's deterioration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille. All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time. I invite you all to unmute for a moment and give these 4 students a round of applause one more time, if possible. Thank you.
Excellent work, everybody. Good job. That was amazing. All of them.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who participated in this. I want to just end with a couple of special thank yous. First of all, this would not have been possible without the many people who made who have been supporting the Don Rothman Award this year and for years now. So I want to thank the donors, and especially to Diana Rothman, who are all listed here. Your support is tremendous, and what an amazing opportunity for these students. I am just very grateful that this is possible for all of them. So thank you to everyone who's generously supported the Don Rothman Award. And I want to especially thank my colleagues who served on the Don Rothman Award committee with me, Anthony Breakspear, Dinel DeSoke, Chris Garrett Williams, Joy Hagan, Erica Hulk, Robin King, and Brenda Sanfilippo. It was a really difficult decision to make. I think everyone in the committee would all attest to that. It was also a really amazing, wonderful experience to look at all of these different kinds of student papers, student projects from different courses. It really showcased all the exciting things that are happening in our program. And I'm just really appreciative that I had the opportunity to be on the committee. I want to give a special thanks to Mark Baker and Lisa Schultz, who were not involved in the committee or staff, but helped me significantly, especially Mark, who was the Don Rothman chair last year. Thank you so much for walking me through this and making sure that I did it right. And then I want to also thank Margaret, Tam, Pamela Edwards, Fiona Wygant, and Amy Vidali for their support in making this event possible. So that's all I have for our itinerary today. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's come here, and I'm really glad that we could finish ahead of schedule. That was a concern with Zoom and whatnot. So thank you again, and hope to see you next year.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.
My pleasure.